Greetings, good night, everyone. Hotep, greetings of peace. And we are really welcoming you here with the Crew Podcast, our Thursdays broadcast, the first and the third Thursday of each month, at least until the end of 2025, is AST Speaks. We get an opportunity to speak of building new legacies. And in that conversation, that discourse, that reasoning, we get an opportunity to speak about things that are related to culture, healing, arts, technology, and spirituality that are grounded in life, inspiration, freedom, and education. Chats for life. This is your host, Queen Mother, Dr. CHEN, and I have an opportunity in this particular podcast broadcast to really navigate through wise counsel, knowledge, power, and prosperity, and really bring another set of perspectives to things that are affecting our women and our men, our children and our elders, and everyone above, so below, inside, and just pushing that energy that allows for us to really highlight energy that brings body, mind, soul, spirit, and consciousness into a welcoming space, into a balanced space, into a space of grace. Usually, I would have a guest in light of a number of things that have happened. We are very fortunate here in the Virgin Islands to have some weather pass. And while it is hurricane season, and we usually go through a significant amount of trauma, psychologically, physiologically, and otherwise, we have been very blessed to be inundated with thunderstorms and rain, some flash flooding in certain areas, but definitely no large damages, anything comparative to a Cat 5 twice over hurricane. It's interesting that this is a time where it is the anniversary of the one of the more devastating hurricanes that affected the Virgin Islands, specifically the Isle of St. Croix, in 1989, Hurricane Hugo. There are actually publications and stories and legends and myths and some real truths on preparedness when it comes to hurricane season, which is every year. Hurricane supplication is in June, and then there's prayers at the end of the season in November. So think about that. Almost a half of a year, there's a possibility of the winds, the whirlwinds, the waters, the seas, the oceans furling up and destroying these gatherings of Caribbean isles, and of course impacting mainland spaces because we've seen hurricanes have become more intensified over the last decade and are actually going up as far, all the way to the New England area on the East Coast. It's just showing you the power of nature, the power of the environment, and why it's important that we respect our environment to the best of our ability. And I start there because what we are also experiencing, give thanks that there was no loss of life, that we're grateful that most persons were able to get home or stay home safely. We were grateful that there were, in select, infinite, engaging wisdom, authorities were able to give notifications, sometimes a little tardy, but so that parents, families that had children going to school were not, taking any undue risk, especially to go to school to then find out they were going to be closed. And that in some, even the university had a delayed opening today. And most of the students, uh, because they were experiencing, loss of power, therefore couldn't use internet, the roads were flooded, or there were certain concerns. Many people just took it as a day to be in reflection. And then, of course, there were those that were sweeping out water from areas that are low lying. So we just want to give thanks and praise for that. that we are able to get through that, and that tonight we can actually have a podcast and broadcast here, because a little bit earlier it might not have happened. So I want to thank the Crew Podcast for their patience. A special shout out to our visionary sister Queen Angela for just being able to make this platform available for those of us that would like to share. So if you have questions, anyone that's listening, anyone that tunes in that would like to offer any questions, if there are particular ideas, I'm going to cover a couple of things that are happening, around this time of the year. It is a wonderful opportunity to look at some of the what people refer to as these international days. And I speak of these international days, and I'm going to do it through the lens of the United Nations first. Second, because one of the significant days in the month of September, besides the joy and privilege of being born in this month, on the ninth month, the ninth day, I don't need to tell you the year, but just know that I'm a senior. It was always a time for me to just be in a space of reflection and looking at what was happening amongst our planetary bodies, what was happening on the earth, and not getting caught up in distractions. And in doing so, it also let me highlight some of the things that took place around West Indian Solidarity Day, which is the first, it coincides with the Labor Day observances in the United States. It's the first Monday of September. And in this case, this year, it was the first. And West Indian Solidarity Day is a day that is really acknowledging the harmony, the collective engagement, the common threads amongst Caribbean kinfolk and persons that make the Caribbean their home. And again, going back into the 60s, when it became part of the Virgin Islands Code, the observance of West Indian solidarity for persons that were coming to the Virgin Islands from other parts of the West Indies, as it was more commonly referred to then, and having some degree of familyhood. So when we're saying solidarity, it wasn't only the political sphere, but it was in the social sphere, in the spiritual sphere, and amongst our families. What were the cultural nuances that kept us together and kept us harmonious? This has grown into stronger ties amongst persons residing in the Caribbean, as far south as Suriname and as far north as the Bahamas and Bermuda. And it includes those areas that also touch the Caribbean Sea. There's a Caribbeanness in Panama, just as there is in Belize and Honduras, just as it is in Costa Rica. And we'll include El Salvador and Nicaragua. Guatemala sometimes tends to hold into a very indigenous, native Amerindian, Mayan kind of vibe. However, there's a presence amongst the Caribbeanness, the movement between island spaces and the movement between coastal areas that's shared. And the same thing when it comes to Guyana, the English speaking parts of Venezuela, the Spanish speaking parts of Guyana, the French speaking, and of course, Suriname, the Dutch and Papiamento speaking. I think it's important to know that there's a tie in these spaces, because sometimes we overlook the connections, and a lot of our brothers and sisters from the 48 contiguous US are have family. We're one people in many ways. Granted, we have cultural heritage nuances that appear different. However, when we look at the core of our families and begin to celebrate together and harmoniously, we'll find that there are a number of our families that have ties in these other Caribbean, Central, and South American spaces, or either they've migrated from the 48 contiguous and were in the Caribbean Americas, or they were in the Caribbean Americas and migrated to the 48 contiguous US. And I'm very clear on some of these things because there's, again, we talk about what's in Solidarity Day, we've talked about Labor Day, just celebrating the labor, the work, the contributions of persons in these spaces. You know, in there have been resolutions put in place as an international day within the United Nations, the International Day of Charity, which is September 5th. And this is an annual observance. And there's many more. You can easily just go to International Days, UN observances, and you'll see a host. Almost every day of the year has some resolution, a proclamation, some type of solidarity, some type of an announcement, some type of a celebration, or at least a moment of reflection or a moment of remembrance, or even just an observance. And it's really important to observe, honor, and speak to that. September 7th, and I'm using the ones that we tend to acknowledge and integrate into some of our spaces where we teach, where we learn, where we engage in creative artivism and community activism and other humanitarian efforts. There's the International Literacy Day. Now, that really comes through UNESCO as the United Nations focuses on areas around economics, uh, education, social organizations and structures, and of course, various elements of culture. And on the 8th of September, that is International Literacy Day. And for some, even inside of organizations, international organizations like Rotary International, it extends for the entire month in regards to looking at things around literacy and basic literacy and the importance of literacy. What is interesting is even on my day, and I claim this day, the day of my birth, September 9th is also a time of observance referred to as International Day to protect education from attack. I found that to be really interesting because sometimes people look at these things and what does that mean? In other words, and I highlight this quote, no child should risk death to learn. And there was a number of reports, and I'll share this. In 2025, 6 years after the first observance of the International Day to Protect Education from Attack, violence against education continues to escalate. Between 2022 and 2023, there were around 6,000 attacks targeting students, educators, and educational institutions. The use of schools for military purposes rose by 20%, and over 10,000 students were killed, abducted, arrested, or harmed. Attacks on education in conflict zones have reached alarming levels. Over the past year, there was a 44% increase in attacks on schools, leading to the death, abduction, and trauma of thousands of students and teachers. These violations threaten not only individual lives, but the future of entire communities. The United Nations continues to advocate for safe access to education, urging countries to invest in resilient education systems and to fully implement the Safe Schools Declaration. To mark the day, UNESCO and partners have hosted high level events in Geneva under the theme Challenging Narratives, Reshaping Action. Unquote. And I think it's important that we just keep that in context, especially in regard to the acts of violence and outright terrorism being launched on university campuses, Catholic schools, public schools, parochial schools, just places of learning where children, learners, teachers, educators, paraprofessionals, and everyone in between, parents, grandparents, should feel safe in a learning environment. It should be seen as a sacred space, similar to a church. But even churches are being violated. Temples, synagogues, masjids, places of worship. And it speaks significantly to what is happening with humanity. Like, really, what's happening with humanity? That persons feel that it is okay or some degree of normalcy to bring such acts of unnecessary violence into spaces of learning or worship or recreation, peace. And I share this from the space of highlighting some of these international days just for this particular time. The 15th of September is highlighted as an International Day of Democracy, which is definitely challenging when democracy seems to be in a state of flux or imbalance in many parts of the world, because it's no longer, it's more like a demonocracy or colonialocracy, where colonizers and demonic behaviors reign instead of liberty, justice, freedom, peace, tranquility for all, right? Those wonderful words that are in various songs, pledges of allegiance, constitutional documents, etc. And so this is this particular day, and it's been in place over 18, I believe this is the 18th year. It's interesting that the highlight, let's listen to what is coming from the United Nations. Democracy draws its strength from people, their voices, their choices, and their participation in shaping their societies. It flourishes when rights are protected, particularly for those most often left behind. Marking the 18th International Day of Democracy, 2025, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres highlighted, quote, the courage of people everywhere who are shaping their societies through dialogue, participation, and trust, deeming these efforts as more vital than ever at a time when democracy and the rule of law are under assault from disinformation, division, and shrinking civic space, unquote. And again, the whole idea around this UN observance of the International Day of Democracy is grounded in from voice to action. And I think it's important to know that, again, and I quote, in a time of shrinking civic space and rising disinformation, building trust, dialogue, and shared decision making is more urgent than ever. Rooted in the principle of we the peoples, this event these events rather aim to show democracy as a living force for agency, hope, and cooperation. And this is wonderful in words and in theory. How do we implement this in a society, in a world that is being challenged almost every minute to create imbalance and to continue marginalizing people and to interfere with equality and to sanitize acts of terror and genocidal antagonisms that are happening around the globe? It's difficult, yes? And part of what is also being shared in this, they have a number of pieces around why democracy matters. There's like videos. You can go to the United Nations, you can go to un.org/democracy day, and you can easily find information about what are some of the ways in which to protect rights and how do we begin to work together to harmonize some of the methods for, quote, addressing and using the media, regardless of the frontiers that are being exposed. And I pause there for a minute because it's very challenging, because some of us are able to use certain platforms. They may not reach the millions, but we're hoping that persons will begin to share some of the content that is being offered so that our people, our humanity, our women, our men, our grandparents, our parents, our children, and everyone in between begins to restore balance, harmony. There's so much anger, there's so much, it's like sulfur everywhere. Persons are just burning with anger. And a lot of times it's because of a lack of information, a lack of understanding, a lack of coordination, uh, not having an opportunity to converse on certain matters before passing judgment on certain matters. We've got persons that overlook one of the more significant observances also, because you have World Tourism Day later in the month, and we can come back and share that. You've got International Translation Day towards the end of the month. You've got World Maritime Day. That's a pretty big day for most persons, especially people that recognize the importance of maritime industries, transport on the water, sailing, and much, much more. There's also International Day of Sign Languages, which is the 23rd of September. I'm going to take a segment. I'm going to pause after sharing a little bit about September 21st, primarily because it was one of the former officers of one of our local community organizations approaching me. And usually we would do things on September 21st. What day do you think is September 21st? Hmm. Hmm. I know it sounds like a game show. And you win the prize. The day is International Day of Peace. And around the world, persons actually they do broadcasts, they do peace circles, they create the peace sign. People will do activities. They may actually march in solidarity. Some people do silent walks. Some people do candlelight visuals to invoke a sense of peace and tranquility for the entire day. You'll see the dove of peace with the leaf, all of that in terms of upholding human rights, addressing conflict areas with the promotion of peace. And so I will share again. I like using what the UN says so the persons do not think this is like just an individualistic piece. And I quote, around the world, lives are being ripped apart, childhoods extinguished, and basic human dignity discarded amidst the cruelty and degradations of war. And those are the words of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The theme for the International Day of Peace for 2025 is Act Now for a Peaceful World. So I'm going to put that question out there. What are you doing? What are you willing to do? Who are you willing to work with to act now for a peaceful world? And what does that look like now as well as in the future? The intention is for it to be maintained, sustained. And I'll share these particular references from the UnitedNations.org site. In a time of turbulence, tumult, and uncertainty, it is critical for everyone to take concrete action to mobilize for peace. From peacekeepers on the front lines of conflict to community members to students in classrooms around the world, everyone has a role to play. We must speak up against violence, hate, discrimination, and inequality, practice respect, and embrace the diversity of our world. There are many ways to act right now. Spark conversations about the urgent need for understanding, nonviolence, and disarmament. Volunteer in your community. Listen to voices different from your own. Challenge discriminatory language in your workplace. Report bullying both online and offline. And take the time to verify facts before you post on social media. You can also speak up with your choices, opting to purchase items from socially conscious brands or donating to organizations that promote sustainability and human rights. The United Nations also works in each of these areas, leading global efforts to advance human rights, fight climate change, and prevent and respond to conflict. So just keep in mind that this is part of like the sustainable development goals that, what life should look like in the immediate future. And there's 17 of them. We can go through that list in a moment. Look at the Peace Building Commission, which actually has its 20th anniversary this year. And they focus on addressing inequalities, poverty, justice, discrimination, again, seen as, quote, potential drivers of violence. And then, of course, raising health and living standards and ending all forms of discrimination and injustice. This is what is intended, this is what's been projected, this is what's been talked about. And many times when we talk about this Act Now campaign, and again, you can go and they've got information where you've got apps, videos, all type of music videos, informative videos, audio pieces to add into your conversation between not just now, but in general. How do we bring these conversations into fruition in a positive, uplifting way to observe, reflect, and honor the International Day of Peace? And I would love to hear some of your ideas of things that you're doing or willing to do, because sometimes we overlook what the goals are, right? So when we talk about these sustainable development goals, and I always encourage people go to UN.org and just search through. There's so much information there, and it's free. Most of that information is free, and it's your time, and you're getting some well researched information that you can then share in different platforms. And the goals have been really moving in the direction. You can go to that site and it will show you what the 17 goals are. It then gives you an idea what the targets are, the different events that happen in the thousands, the publications that have come to support each of those goals, and of course the actions. And it's very grounding. So you have, of these 17 sustainable development goals, the first one, goal one, end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Goal two, end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Goal three, ensure healthy lives and promote well being for all at all ages. Goal four, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Goal five, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Goal six, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Goal seven, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Goal 8, promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Goal 9, build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Goal 10, reduce inequality within and among countries. Goal 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Goal 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Goal 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Goal 14, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. Goal 15, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. I know that's a lot in one barrel. Goal 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. And Goal 17, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. And I think it's really powerful because some persons do not always wish to understand it. So I'll go the first, as I said, one is no poverty, two is zero hunger, three, good health and well being, four, quality education, five, gender equality, six, clean water and sanitation, seven, affordable and clean energy, eight, decent work and economic growth, nine, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, 10, reduced inequalities, 11, sustainable cities and communities, 12, responsible consumption and production, 13, climate action, 14, life below water, 15, life on land, 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and 17, partnerships for the goals. And I encourage people look for SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, sdgs.un.org, or just Google Sustainable Development Goals UN. And that way you can, this is a working piece of information that has a long lasting, long reaching space. And this goes back to the conversation around act now for a peaceful world. When persons are not impoverished, have clean water and basic human needs met, the energy of war lessens, violence decreases significantly. And you can restore a sense of what is that word? Peace. Not PIECE, but PEACE. That peace, that tranquility that allows for humans to be comfortable with the camaraderie and the harmony and the tranquility and the balance and the honoring of respecting one another, even when we differ on certain perspectives. The International Day of Peace has its origins from definitely from the back in the day. It was formalized after many of the civil rights, human rights movements, marches, efforts, and it was established by the United Nations General Assembly through lobbying in the late 70s, but formalized in 81. And then in 2001, they chose to unanimously vote and designate a day as a period of nonviolence and ceasefire. Just need to get that. And it would be wonderful if on September 21st, 2025, there was a global nonviolence environment and a ceasefire. I want us to think on where I would go with this. And most of the time, I say things from the space of Ma'at, as truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. So tonight will not be any different. The imbalances that are have created warfare that has caused the lives of tens of thousands. This need for people to get that. Tens of thousands in Palestine by whoever's responsible. We could, some, yes, it's the Israelis, but there's other alliances with Israel, the state of Israel, that allow that. And it's time. And people are speaking and people are marching, and there should be no interference in providing humanitarian support for the survivors. That should happen before the 21st, but at least by the 21st on the International Day of Peace. Persons that claim any form of humanity are encouraged to take action in that regard. I pause because sometimes when you start to say these things, you have to be very mindful because this too can be perceived and shared in a way that persons do not understand, respect, or honor different views regarding what is taking place in Palestine, what's taking place in Haiti, the intentional warfare for hundreds of years that is continued, that has raped and stripped at the very core of humanity for this independent black African led country in the middle of the Caribbean space on the smaller component of former Hispaniola, San Dominguez, Quisqueya, all the names you call it, and to create what appears to be gangland style warfare, but fed by trained mercenaries and weaponry that comes from some of these same other countries, whether it's Israel, the US. There needs to be a day of peace. Days of peace. We need to just have the day of peace and then it continues. There needs to be, all of this conflict resolution, negotiation, management needs to be implemented so that persons can restore balance and harmony in these spaces. We encourage the United States military to remove its military forces, submarines included, from within the Caribbean space, claiming to look for, because it started with drug trafficking, and the research has clearly proven, and not just layperson's research or commentary, but professional, vetted research has made it clear that Venezuela is not the source of drug trafficking and production. And persons need to look at the other countries, inclusive of places like Ecuador and other parts of South America, as well as manufacturing resource and leaders in the 48 contiguous US. And we need to be real careful on the interference of the Caribbean as a zone of peace. Not to say that there aren't issues in the Caribbean, but when was the last time persons recall seeing warfare in the Caribbean spaces? I want you to ponder on that. And yes, we could jump to the 1980s and speak of the US invasion in Grenada. That was supposed to save the people from Marxists and communists, Leninists. And it ended up leading into an assassination of an entire administration that were elected by the people of Grenada at the time. We don't need a recurrence of that in the region of the Caribbean. And there has to be a more professional, more humane approach of how you engage in this region. We do not need a Palestine in the Caribbean. We do not need a Sudan in the Caribbean. We do not need a Congo in the Caribbean. And we definitely have been speaking against the chaos in Haiti in the Caribbean. These embargoes against Cuba and other countries has been, you know, misinformation. Listen to what was just said and what we mentioned earlier from the UN. It's misinformation. Persons are using misinformation to as an excuse to create warfare, to create another industry, to become trillionaires. Because billionaireism isn't enough. And it's costing the lives of innocent children, women, men, elders. And some of these survivors will be so traumatized that the warfare syndrome piece is going to be innate and continue, and we won't have peace. Now that I've said that part, I'm going to highlight one more piece before we close tonight, and I want to thank those of you that have joined in. Greetings, Sister Queen Patrice. I am grateful to have persons that will at least share reflections. If there's things that are said that people don't understand, let us share and reason together so that we can have a higher form of awareness together, that we can learn how to speak and reason without blowing everybody up off the planet, because nature can do that for us if that's what the cause is. And those persons moving in that accord, is nothing godly, nothing spiritually grounding, and just promoting war and more war and more war. You can't annihilate everybody. You might think you can, but just that spark of spirit will maintain. And we really need to do this is time to do something different. We have persons that speak of conflict resolution till it grows out the side of their ears. And now that we have an opportunity for conflict resolution and engagement and exchange, let's do that. Stop going after and fostering more warfare. This Venezuelan Guyanese issue, people should understand who's going to make the money at the end of the day. And it needs to be addressed differently. So, with that for tonight, and the next time that we get together, I'm looking forward to having more of you. Ask a friend, encourage them to come and engage with us. October 2nd and 16th will be our broadcasts in October, and we'll get an opportunity to cover some other pieces. There's a lot happening in the Caribbean regions as well as throughout the Americas and the world. And we send our prayers of strength and harmony to the families that are experiencing loss. When you hear the word lynching in 2025, for some of us, it's all too familiar, especially in Mississippi. And so we send prayers, comforting, healing heart prayers, that justice will be served and that the truth will come to light and that all responsible will be addressed, handled in the way that it needs to be addressed and handled. because we're speaking of things that are happening on university campuses or schools. We send in Minnesota, I mean, we would spend the whole broadcast giving prayers of strength and healing heart mercies because some people can't contain their mental imbalance or their antagonisms or their genocidal terrorist behaviors to even have a different opinion or to just pop off. Here we call it just lose their mind. Yeah? So we're asking, take some time, those that are listening, that are tuning in, that are here, share with us what are things that are happening in your community that restore peace. What should September 21st and every day of the year look like when we speak of International Day of Peace? How do we maintain ceasefire? How do we create a more humane environment wherever you are, wherever we are, so that it can be sustained, maintained, and help us to build new legacy? With that, I say thank you very much for joining us here at AST Speaks. There's so much to talk about. Special shout out to the African Union and the CARICOM summit that was held in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia from September 6th to 7th, followed with the climate change convening, proceeded with a number of diaspora events. I'm hoping to have some of the delegates that participated to join us in October to give us a update and share some of that footage that impacts all of us in the diaspora as we're speaking truth as power around social justice, self-determination, independence, reparations. I'm going to say that word again, reparations, so that we can repair the damages done internally as well as externally within our communities. Here, coming from the Caribbean civilization spaces, we're asking for it to be global. True? With that, we know that culture heals humanity, land is our foundation, and spiritual harmony unifies us. We encourage you to share with Oz Speaks on the first and third Thursday, 8 p.m., here with the Crew Podcast. And again, this has been your host for this evening. Next time, who knows? You never know who might join me. This is Queen Mother, Dr. Chinzira, and I look forward to the next time. Until then, do your best to stay focused, keep your energy expansive and wide, draw in that love, that healing heart mercies, at the same time, restore the balance so that the principles of Ma'at, truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony, remain in the balance. Peace. Hotep. Good night.